Welcome. I'm Sarah Warren, founder of Oasis Center for Wellbeing, where we offer well-being broadly defined. Spring has arrived, the vaccine is rolling out, and we are still in a very serious pandemic. Detroit has cases that are rising. Miami has just declared an emergency. The pandemic continues to throw off work-life balance, way off balance, and was bad before the pandemic, and the pandemic has made work-life balance even more challenging, and that's going to continue. I actually predict that COVID tensions in the workplace could rise. For instance, as more of us are vaccinated, more people may end up feeling like they don't need to take precautions in the workplace, while others may continue to feel cautious or even fearful, and that could cause frictions. Just as one example. I know in my own work, I am seeing people who are vaccinating, struggling to negotiate what seems possible and what doesn't, and to negotiate that with other people, and it's not so easy. And with the near blurring of boundaries between work and personal time, it's not clear that when the pandemic is finally over, that that's going to change, or how quickly it's going to change, if ever. By way of housekeeping, we are now offering workshops and retreats to help organizations cope with stress and adversity, even trauma. We're also offering audits of supports for mental well-being in the workplace. In our podcast series, we have a podcast coming up on April 26th that is directly relevant to what we're talking about today. That's on protecting sleep. I will be the featured speaker. Sleep impacts every aspect of our functioning, including our work functioning, but also our health and well-being overall. We're in dialogue with several companies who are at the forefront of innovation in taking care of their employees, which will be featuring in upcoming podcasts. If you have a thoughtful company to recommend that we might feature, please let us know. Check out our website to stay current on our services and our upcoming offerings. We have lots on the calendar, particularly in April. April is a very full month. Go to oasisnorthshore.com. If you have suggestions about topics or speakers, you can reach out to connor@multicoach.org. So here we are today to listen to the brilliant employment attorney, Nan Lassen, from an earlier Oasis podcast while we were in the full throes of the pandemic, sharing her analysis of the pandemic workplace. You might note the graphic that we sent about 10 minutes ago in your email that sort of conceptualizes her framework of analysis. She references that multiple times. And she really offers what we at Oasis think of as a program for living. So we hope you enjoy it. I'll join you at the end.
I want to welcome Nancy Lassen, a labor attorney at the firm of Willig, Williams, and Davidson in Philadelphia. It is very much my honor to have you with us, Nan. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Sarah, and this is going to be a fun discussion, I think.
Good. So when you and I were preparing, we talked about the vast differences between the world of work in 2020, January 2020 versus January 2021. And I want to have you start there with an understanding that you really brought into focus for me, that work-life balance has become increasingly challenging pre-pandemic, had become increasingly challenging in the 20 years or so before the pandemic. So we were already kind of askew in terms of work-life balance, and then comes the pandemic. So paint the picture for us of what the workplace looked like January 2020 versus January 21, where we are now.
Sure. So, Sarah, I have a pretty wide-angle view of work and life. I've been a labor attorney for more than 40 years, and I work in probably thousands of different kinds of workplace among hundreds of different kinds of workers, from professional and technical employees to blue-collar and building trades employees and everything in between. And I think it's fair to say I have never seen as radical a change in the milieu of work in such a brief period of time as we've experienced in this very brief period between January of last year and January of this year. I've come to see the organization of life, let's say, as primarily falling into three different spheres: a social sphere that consists of all the things you would put in your social life, your home, your family, your friends, your interests, hobbies, community, leisure. In one sphere, an economic sphere, work, income, economic security, food and shelter security, and a health sphere of all the things you would think of as your health behaviors, your physical health, your mental health. And then an all-important category that I view as completely separate, which is sleep. Those three spheres interact, and to some extent, when they are, when they're imbalanced, there's increased tension between in the Venn diagram and the overlap of your social, your economic, and your health. The last year has, in my view, created a radical increase in tensions between those spheres, within the spheres, and an extreme amount of imbalance. I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, with respect to the social sphere, I would say that only about 35 to 40% of the people that I work with work at home, but they work at home, and a lot of those folks are parents. So now, whereas their children would go to school, or they would go to daycare, or they would have other kinds of caregivers, those options are largely unavailable. That results in a very marked increase in the daily stress for people who are working at home, who have children. The absence of friends, in even family, the isolation, the lack of continuity in relationships, the isolation in communities has resulted in a vast increase in the tension and stress that in the social sphere. In the health sphere, and those are all new things. Those are changes that have literally didn't exist for most of us on March 1st of last year, and then boom, within 2 weeks to 30 days, the torque and the stress in those areas of our social sphere were ever-present, even omnipresent realities. In our economic sphere, most of us have had our occupations turned on their heads in some way or another. Those of us who had offices, like myself, perhaps haven't been to their offices for 10 or 11 months, 9 to 10 months at least. Those who are essential workers are now working under conditions of extreme physical and mental stress. And then there's the unfortunate 30% or so of workers who weren't able to retain their jobs. Some industries are under extreme duress, and from restaurant industries to the theater industries and arts, small businesses that have just lost so much of their traction in the past year, and has resulted in extreme stress and anxiety in the economic sphere. And finally, a really huge change, and I think this perhaps relates more to this program, an enormous change that people have suffered and workers have suffered is to their own health sphere. Almost every variable that I put in that sphere has degraded in the past 9 to 12 months. Some have done a better job in stopping the mudslide, or putting some walls in place, but it's been fairly dramatic. Degraded physical health in terms of the load of COVID, especially mental health, COVID, and the political environment of the past year, the stresses and anxieties that people have experienced within their own social and economic spheres have resulted in marked deterioration, I think, in the typical mental health profile of most people. Health habits have deteriorated, from our ability to get exercise to maintaining the daily predicted structures of our life that, say what you will about it, humans do best, and all the research and studies have long established that humans do best when they have a relatively established daily structure. Well, that kind of was thrown out the window about 9 months ago. And finally, in that health category, I am seeing across every occupational group and every industry a degradation in sleep. And we all know that sleep patterns, sleep amount, the quality of sleep is a huge variable in general health status. And as stress in the various spheres increases, and especially as time allocated to other activities within those other spheres increases, particularly the social sphere with home demands and work demands in the economic sphere, what has to give is something in the health sphere, and too often that's sleep. And in the past year, I honestly, Sarah, I wish I had $5 for every time someone has said to me that their sleep is shut to hell, just since the beginning of the pandemic. So all those things are extensive changes of a character, quality, and frankly, volume that are astonishing for people to have undergone in a mere 9 months' time.
We all live it, and we all see it and know it on a certain level, and yet having you articulate it in that kind of clear, concise way really brings home how extraordinary the circumstances are that we find ourselves in. It's really...
And I would say that the last time, these are the kind of changes our country probably last experienced in the period between December 1st, 1941 and December 1st, 1942, when, we went from a happy peacetime economy to being under siege and attack and the entire country going to war. I mean, these are the this is the type of massive personal change that individuals across the spectrum of this country have not experienced in 75 or 80 years. It's really astonishing.
Right, and that means that there are very few people who either lived through that or remember it who are alive now. So for most of us, this is a completely novel kind of upheaval, which also has other social challenges layered on top of it. The political divisiveness, the protracted chaos associated with the election, which I think made, November, December, 2020 different from certainly any period in my lifetime. And then, you put the two together, and a lot of people are very much on edge, I think, and worn down from the whole confluence.
Yeah, I think that's true, that within that health sphere, and particularly the mental health component of health, there was the additional pressure and anxiety of extreme social distraction that reached a peak in the fall and basically through this month with the insurrection in Washington. But it was pretty constant all year. I mean, the volume of from the dissension and discourse, social dissension and social discourse, it was not new at the beginning of January 2020. So I think that was a stressor that had been fairly prominent since 2017. So perhaps I didn't emphasize it as much as something that was a change. But you're right, the drama and the conflict and I think general anxiety that Americans, no matter what their belief structures are or their or how they express those beliefs, definitely became more heated in the period from September to January of this year. It didn't help. It didn't help anybody's mental health. That's for sure. Yeah. And in the workplace, I see the overlap of these three spheres and the collision, if you will, of all those stressors, creating a really extreme amount of tension on humans trying to work. If we're working at home, the impact of anxiety and tension in our homes and distractions and isolation, the impact of isolation has just been enormous. It's had such an impact on concentration and effectiveness and contentedness. People who are working at home are struggling for equipoise, struggling for balance. And some are doing better at it, especially if they're being helped by their employers to address some of the isolation and anxiety and lack of structure, lack of community issues.
And what does that look like, Nan, when an employer is providing meaningful help to offset the isolation? What kinds of programs are we looking at? What kinds of interventions?
Well, I've seen employers basically, working in two modalities there. First, a whole variety of different approaches to turn down the stress and turn down the anxiety for for home workers. Staying in touch with workers has been a huge response. For example, things that I've seen are employers organizing group exercises, group sings, group prayers, group shouts. I actually had the privilege of observing a group shout, and it was very fascinating. It was led by an young Aboriginal man who from Australia, who they're specialized in a variety of different shouts that, in fact, are very stress relieving. I've seen employers turn down that stress by doing all kinds of things, from you can wear casual clothes, supplying boxed lunches at work, small businesses or smaller businesses who structure regular wellness chats, Zoom lunches, opportunities for workers, for co-workers to stay in touch with each other in chat groups. So I think that for home workers, turning down the stress is one thing. A second thing has seemed to me to be very effective is working with your employees and your coworkers to the extent you can mentor someone else in how critical it is to establish a work structure. Unfortunately, people who aren't reporting to an office and don't have fixed work hours or even fixed expectations anymore frequently don't know when or how to quit. So don't know where or how to establish work. And so the best employers that I've seen do this have said, look, it might be in our interest to have you all out there working 12 and 14 hours a day, but we don't want you to do that. And they have conducted mentoring and goals, seminars, and even one-on-one with workers to say, okay, how can we help you to establish a fixed work area, establish fixed work hours, adjust your expectations of how much you'll work. Those are really critical variables for workers to keep work in perspective, keep work in that economic sphere and not let it bleed into that social sphere and the health sphere any more than, to keep it in balance within those spheres. And of course, Sarah, the best employers are maintaining conspicuously safe work practices, high-quality PPE. I know so many employers that have gone from the, paper masks that are sometimes of questionable quality to distributing KN95 masks now, which are pretty widely available. The paper masks will cost, 12 to 15 cents a piece. KN95 mask, which is much more effective and much more protective, may cost $1.50 to $2 a piece. But they've got protocols in place, practices for maintaining a safe workplace. They're supplying quality PPE, and those things do have not only a demonstrable impact on maintaining the organization and access to your work site, but they do help the workers, the people that you employ, be confident and feel less stressed going to work. So those are the three general types of structures: turning down the stress, mentoring people on establishing reasonable work expectations, and a schedule, and establishing safe work practices that I think are the most effective and that I've seen most often from quality employers.
And you also spend time speaking one-on-one with individual employees, and you end up, you listed when you and I were first talking about this program, you listed the myriad roles you find yourself playing: parent, mentor, coach, therapist. I'm going to add life coach, based on what you told me about some of the conversations you have with people one-on-one. But tell me about some of the kinds of things that you end up helping people problem solve about in order for them to try to restore some semblance of balance in their work lives.
Well, until you use that phrase, life coach, Sarah, I certainly never really thought of myself as that. It's not a title that I claim. Believe me, I'm trained as an attorney, but it is true that I have a wide range of contact with people that I am very close to at a personal level, and who I mentor around the fact that they either work for me, which are over 100 people, or that I work for them, which are probably well over 100 direct clients. My clients are, for the most part, labor organizations, and they're labor organizations that have a lot of staff and officers and all the stuff that I'm talking about, all the kinds of changes and the impact that people have experienced in the past year. Those are certainly taking place with my clients and my own employees, struggling to maintain balance between those social, economic, and health spheres, and also within our bargaining units. So I find myself, often, many times a week, less now as the pandemic has gone on. It seemed like it was every day, every hour in March, April, May, as people were adjusting their expectations and trying to catch up with the changes. But talking with people about how critical it is that they understand, have a big tent. I call it a big tent understanding of the organicity of your life, to get a grip on how to control these variables, to understand the issues in your social sphere, your economic sphere, your health sphere, so that you can identify particular areas where the stressor on one aspect or one variable in that sphere is becoming a boil over, a blowout type, or closing on a blowout type situation, and those are different from person to person. I mean, I have some of my clients whose physical condition has just radically changed over the past year, either because they've had COVID and they have had to find a way to get back from that, or because their health habits have changed radically. People that used to have much more access to exercise and to a healthy diet and to much more established daily structures, which all fell away for various reasons in the pandemic, and resulted in really, screaming sirens in that health behavior area. I try to the extent I can, as I know everybody who's, all of us that are in this situation, try to have an understanding where we can inventory our behaviors and inventory our wellness in these various spheres. And sometimes I'm able to pull that together a little more for people, because when you're down there in the trees struggling, it can be very hard, Sarah, as you know, to see the big picture. And that's what you do, and it's what Oasis does. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of wellness issues that I really encourage people to turn to. I think that seeing the bigger picture and working with someone that can help you refocus and help you get out of the weeds, get out of the trees, and get a wider eye view on your own life and stressors is sometimes, for my guys at least, critical to getting themselves out of the mud.
So part of what you're talking about is sort of being able to get your life in perspective in order to be able to see where the opportunities are, to be able to try maybe doing something different, right? To find that opening or those openings.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, everybody knows when they're not feeling comfortable, or I would hope everybody knows when they're not feeling comfortable. And when not feeling comfortable progresses to discomfort, and discomfort progresses to agitation or, psychic or physical pain, then you have to be able to step back. Whether you can do that on your own, or you can do that with someone close to you or someone outside your daily microcosm, but you have to be able to step back and inventory the variables in those spheres that are causing that stress. And I have the privilege, and I have the relationship with so many of the people that I work with and know in my own work to be able to give perspective or help them get perspective and make changes that create more balance between those spheres, and therefore and thereby reduce the tension in their life structures. That's the critical thing. You have to make changes that reduce the tensions.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said to me the other day as we were preparing was, it was implied in what you were just saying, but it's that you feel like it's really essential that people have someone to talk to.
I do. I think that within the social sphere, one of the biggest changes that I've seen between January of 2020 and January of 2021 is the dramatic increase in social isolation and absence, just gaps in our lives where we used to have regular gatherings with our family, where we used to have neighborhood picnics, where we used to, we call it the chats over the water cooler, although there aren't many water coolers anymore. I guess now we meet each other. We meet each other in hallways and lobbies and, the lunchroom, or we hang out in each other's doorways, or in the swing room and the break room. They don't happen anymore. And so I think it's really it's part of the human condition to want and need social context, to want and need engagement. We're all on a continuum of needing that. There are some people who are quite content living an ascetic, monastic kind of existence where those needs are minimal, but most of us fall somewhere in the middle of that continuum, and we need that regular social engagement. So if you don't have it, in particular, people that either live alone or that live in a situation where they're isolated from family that they have otherwise very close relationships with, or isolated from community, or who work at home. Working at home is a huge stressor for human beings, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And that is definitely demands that you establish some kind of contact on a regular basis, on a regular daily basis, outside of yourself, to try to fill those voids. And some people are doing it and some people are not doing it. People that are going to work every day, I think on the whole, my observation is that they are having a better time meeting and filling the social gaps, but a worse time with anxiety and fear from health and similar worries and concerns. People that stay at home are having more effects of isolation and a harder time meeting the social gaps, but have less anxiety and concern over their health situation. So there's trade-offs from all angles, but however you are working, you need to have, in my view, somebody outside of yourself who can mentor, guide, help you, and you can just feed into and off of about maintaining these balances.
And I think what you're saying is it could be a professional, right? It could be a therapist or, a coach of some sort, or an attorney like you. But I think you're also saying it could be a friend.
Absolutely. I mean, it could be your spouse. It could be, it could be a friend. It could be a neighbor. It could be a family member. It could be. It doesn't have to be someone that is a professional. Although I will tell you that there are some of my clients and friends whose stress and anxiety is of such dimension that I do think that healers of some character are the best touchstones. I mean, you have to make that call. I mean, when you get to the point that you're floundering and drowning, you probably need to reach for someone who is a wellness professional. If you're experiencing the just kind of controlled fear and anxiety and lack of calm that most of us are feeling, then definitely you hold your friends closer. You hold your family closer. You hold your spouse and your children closer. And sometimes your adult children. I mean, in my case, I love talking to my adult children, and I find that lends dimension and perspective and meaning to my weeks. So you can. I'm not sure that would have been true when they were teenagers, but now that they're adults. But yes, I think you find whoever it is that helps you with that isolation and with that anxiety. But the key thing, Sarah, I just want to keep coming back to this. To understand and make meaningful changes that reduce the stress in the spheres of your life, I find it helpful to bear in mind that umbrella structure, to itemize. I have a checklist of the variables in each of those spheres, and I do my own wellness checks, and I encourage my clients, do your own wellness checks. I mean, ask. You don't have to do this every day. You don't even have to do it every week. Periodically, check in and say, okay, do we need a tune-up? How are we doing in these variables and these factors within the spheres? Because the tension between the spheres and the imbalance between the spheres is, generally indicative of some one or more of the variables, becoming a source of stress. And you have to, in order to address it, you have to be aware of it. And in order to be aware of it, you have to be conscious. And in order to be conscious, there has to be some level of some way that you're periodically checking in with yourself and inventorying your own wellness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's abundantly clear. I think it's wise, and I do think that the Venn diagram that you created that we sent out for people is like, there's your checklist, right? Like, there it is.
That was my 5-minute diagram for you.
Yeah.
On Sunday morning, so we could have our conversation.
Yeah. No, it's a very comprehensive schema. So we've been talking a lot about the issues related to work-life imbalance. The very first conversation we had that led to us scheduling this podcast tonight was about the presence of the political divide in the workplace. And that directly interfaces with COVID practices because COVID practices have become politicized to some degree. And I said the issue of the political divide is so hot that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Some people, because they're not ready to talk about it yet. And you said, well, I can talk about it. So we haven't really talked about that yet. And I think that to the extent that it is part of what we're living with, is not just all of the effects of the pandemic itself, but the political conditions, that have become so extraordinarily polarized. And those polarizations are everywhere in our lives. So I'm making an inference that you see it in your work, in the workplace. And I think based on the fact that you said you could talk about it means you have something to say about what you see. So what do you see?
There has definitely been an increase in social tension, an increased talk, I would say, and around political issues. And there are some workers, there are some of the unions that I work with have identified specific individuals that they feel are so intensely involved in their politics that they believe they present risks of, there's so much anger, there's so much emotion that they believe they present risks of physical violence, and so that's been a focus. Happily, not widespread, but I do know cases, and I'm going to be discreet and not identify particular employers, but I definitely know,
of course,
certain kinds of trades, different unions, and specific workplaces where a watch has been instituted on individuals who we believe pose or could pose a generalized threat to coworkers or the work environment. And there's a wide range of responses of employers to how to deal with these situations. For the most part, I think I said this to you, employers either under-respond or over-respond. Either they're on the under-response continuum, it's like, okay, well, nothing's happened yet. We'll deal with it if something happens. That's not a good response. Generally, I think if there are, when you have times of discord and distress, and those behaviors are manifesting themselves in antagonisms at work, whether that's anything from trash talk to verbal aggression to physical aggression. Those are, I think you have to be more proactive than that. The best workplaces are more proactive. I am aware of a couple of employers that basically said, and have tried to, in various ways, to enforce of, these are not issues that come to work. And mm-hmm. That's not terribly successful, because that's like asking someone to check their social sphere at the door. If you remember what I said earlier, the various spheres of our daily life are a Venn diagram. You're taking your social sphere to work, you're bringing your health sphere home and to work, and you're taking work to your health atmosphere and home. So, the lockdown mentality of some employers of, these are not conversations and these are not discussions that we'll have here. You can, and those employers do that in ways like, you could always wear whatever ball cap you wanted into the plant. Well, now it can't have any kind of political candidate or saying or phrase on it. It has to be a plain ball cap. You could previously wear any kind of a T-shirt under your coveralls on the assembly line. Now it has to be a plain T-shirt or have a non-political or non-politicized or social content on it. So those kind of suppression techniques are not terribly useful either. Companies that want to institute, a sort of like let's have a visual scrub. We've worked with to develop a uniform requirement, for example. Hats are permitted, but they're company hats. And the company gives out the hats. Company T-shirts are issued. Company coveralls are issued. And I do find that when you clear the visual field, that does help. It really does help. There's a bit, Sarah, of the charging the red cape that I've seen happening in a lot of workplaces. We had a group in a rural area, which shall go unnamed, where some of the guys decided, well, they were just going to muster up like an hour early for work every day and kind of have a spontaneous political rally outside the gates in support of their now defeated candidate. And that was quite controversial because they were on, on public land, and that was a First Amendment expression. It really did turn up the heat and the volume, and we had to we, meaning the union, and I had to advise the union on some response to that, and my response was they have a right to be there, and don't turn up the heat. Don't turn up the heat. And so, let them have their demonstrations, and sure enough, after 2 or 3 days, it stopped. But that was a provocation, and if there had been a counter demonstration, or there had been some kind of, hardline response, and police were called, and it became more confrontational, it could easily have escalated. And that is a cycle, whether at work or in our lives in the community or at home. This divide that you're talking about depends on finding ways to de-escalate. And culturally and socially, we've struggled with that these past few years, especially in the past year, with the increased tensions of COVID and the election. So that's the most prominent intervention at the workplace level has been strategies for de-escalation.
Yeah. Which I would say, as a psychologist, makes a lot of sense to me. And Nan Lassen, thank you so much for sharing your really wise and practical insights into how we can navigate the world of work during this really challenging time.
It's always fun.
I hope you enjoyed Nan's insights and wisdom, whether you're an HR or a business owner or an employee, a manager. If you know an organization that you think is doing interesting, creative, innovative things during this time of extraordinary pressures in the workplace, please reach out to us and let us know. Or if you know an organization that could benefit from a retreat or a workshop that's designed to help people cope with these extraordinary challenges in the workplace, please let us know. And finally, if you know an organization that might benefit from an audit of the services that are available to support employees and managers in mental well-being, please reach out to Connor at multicoach.org. We hope you'll join us again, and happy spring.